Conditions may apply. By CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 21. Ivy, the man, the myth, the child? Izuku was freaking out. He literally just jumped off a roof because he was freaking out so much. The Eraserhead was here talking to him, and of course, he wasn't intimidated by Izuku. Why can't he just leave? Izuku wasn't holding any of the cards, and Eraser knew that. Freak. Why the hell is it that Izuku had never had issues keeping his Ivy mask firmly in place while facing down drug dealers, gang members, rapists, and murderers? But Eraserhead shows up pretty much as unthreateningly as possible. And all of a sudden, little baby 13-year-old Izuku is shivering his timbers. He needed to pull himself together. He's Ivy right now, and he needs to act like it. Making their way down the side of the building to a height more reasonable to jump to the next rooftop, Ivy takes the reins and falls into the familiar movements of their patrols, keeping an eye on Eraser following closely behind. Ivy just jumped off a 20-some-odd story building and was already vaulting off the fire escape a few stories down to the next roof over. Either they had some sort of flying agility quirk, or they had no regard for their own life. He wouldn't even do that without his capture scarf, and he's been throwing himself around cityscapes for almost a decade and a half. Ivy moved with grace, not paying any heed to the drop below them, and they rolled back up onto their feet on the neighboring roof, glancing back to make sure he was following. The kid wasn't kidding. He was actually going to have to put in effort in order to keep up. Ivy went through a normal patrol, following no pattern and going wherever the wind or their whims took them. It was a Thursday night, so it wasn't too busy, but Ivy kept a suspicious eye on Eraser every time they passed someone down below in an alley, sleeping or rummaging through dumpsters. He made no move to tell them to stop or go somewhere else. Good. Izuku knew as much as he could about Eraser's quirk and fighting style, but he didn't know a thing about his character or values, so tonight was a test. Ivy didn't know how they could possibly drive Eraserhead out against his will, but they would figure it out if Eraser stepped a toe out of line tonight. It wasn't until an hour later that they came across a mugging in progress. Some lady was holding another woman at knife point and demanding she hand over her purse. The woman was fumbling with the strap around her shoulder, and Eraser looked to Ivy, looking for a cue. Interesting. He was still following Ivy's lead. Was it an act to get on their good side, or were they actually going to default to their instructions? Curious to see how Eraser would have resolved the situation, and also very much wanting a chance to see him up close in action, Ivy nodded their head toward the pair below, indicating that Eraser should go handle it. It was pretty low stakes. The first woman didn't look like they knew how to handle the knife, nor like she actually wanted to. From an outsider's perspective, both women seemed equally afraid of the other. Ivy was sure they could handle it on their own, so Eraser should have no problem. The situation would likely be resolved if they just revealed themselves with no violence necessary. The perfect test. Would he go in and knock the quote-unquote villain out and drag her to the precinct? Or would he see two scared people, both down on their luck in the slums, and have mercy? Eraser seemed to realize the situation was unlikely to devolve into violence, and this was a test because he took a moment to look at Ivy with a raised eyebrow before dropping down from the roof between the two women, facing the one with the knife. With a firm backhand to the wrist, he disarmed her without injury, and then quickly restrained her with his capture scarf. The whole thing was over in seconds, and both of them were staring at him with wide eyes, but instead of calling it into the station, he just looked back up at Ivy again, deferring to their judgment. Very interesting. Ivy followed Eraser's path down to street level. So far, so good. How about another test? Ivy turned to the woman who was being mugged. Are you all right, miss? She responded with a shaky nod. Are you close to wherever you're headed? Another shaky nod. Do you think you could make your way there all right? Yeah. It's just down the... She took a breath to calm herself before continuing. Yes. Yeah. I'll be fine. It's just down the block and someone's there to meet me. I'll be fine, thank you. All right. Good. You can go. We'll take care of this. You don't have to stick around. That wasn't standard hero protocol, and Ivy knew that, but Ivy also knew that this woman was from around here and she didn't need coddling. If she said she could make it back safe, then she could make it back safe. They were proven right when they watched her pull pepper spray and a shiv out of her purse as she walked away. She'd just been caught with her guard down, and she wouldn't make that mistake again. Eraser didn't argue and let her walk away. The other woman was still in a panic and half-heartedly struggling with her restraints when Ivy shifted their attention to her. What do you need that money for so badly? Ivy asked. The woman didn't look like she expected that question. Ivy didn't recognize her. She must be new in town. What? She replied after a moment. You obviously need money urgently, or if you're out here pointing knives at people with no clue what you're doing. So, what do you need it for? They clarified. The woman looked more confused than ever. I don't understand. What do you care? Well, I care because whatever you need it desperately enough to do this. Clearly, for the first time. You don't want to be here any more than she did, do you? No. I just... The woman started to tear up. I'm so hungry. I can't... The woman cut herself off as she sank to her knees, and Ivy shot a look at Eraser, who unbound her without argument. Hey, it's okay. I understand, but you can't go around taking from people who barely have any more than you do. And I can't let you go around threatening people with a knife. How long have you been on the streets? The woman buried her face in shame. A few weeks. I haven't eaten in days. I didn't want to, but Izuku knelt down and shushed her, putting a comforting hand on her shoulder. It was pretty clear you didn't want to. I know. Do you know the mini-mart on Block 5? Ivy asked. Yeah? Shimamoto-san, the man who runs it, gives out day-old pastries at closing. And the cafe on Block 18, Mochizuki-san, usually has the closing shift, and when she does, she puts all the bread in a separate garbage bag in the dumpster because the manager won't let her give it away. It's not exactly fine dining, but it's better than nothing. A lot of businesses throw out perfectly good food. Ivy explained. She looked like she was hanging on to their every word. You should find a group. It's not safe out here on your own, Ivy said as they picked up her fallen knife and handed it back to her. There's a group that usually makes camp 2 blocks south of here. You can try with them for tonight, okay? Why aren't you arresting me? I don't understand, she asked. Well, we could. You'd get food that way. Is that what you want? No, of course not. I don't... No, she quickly denied. Then we won't. Remember what I said, though, and if I catch you trying this again, I will bring you in. Got it? I've got eyes everywhere. Don't hedge your bets. They took a stern tone. Yes, definitely, I won't, she assured. Good. This is all I've got right now, but you need to eat something. they said, handing her a smushed-up granola bar from their pocket. She took it gratefully. Ivy gave her a nod before giving Eraserhead a look and jerking his head toward the opening of the alley, indicating it was time to go. Ivy left, and Eraser followed without complaint. Damn. Okay. Maybe he isn't so bad. This was a test, and Shota knew it. He wasn't going to play into it and wait for Ivy to decide he didn't pass and wasn't worth their time. A logical ruse. Shota knew these kinds of games well, so he defaulted to Ivy rather than letting himself do whatever Ivy deigned the wrong thing. If they weren't going to tell him what to do, then he'd make them show him. The way they dealt with the situation definitely wasn't standard protocol, but Shota didn't disagree. It was clear to him that the woman didn't want to be doing what she was doing, and Ivy was also perceptive enough to see that and deal with the situation accordingly. He seems to have passed Ivy's little test, and he was done playing mind games. All right, Ivy. I'm not going to keep waiting for you every time something happens. Just tell me what's permittable crime and what isn't around here. I mostly agree with how you handled that, but I'm not going to wait and try to figure out your moral code incident by incident. He told Ivy once they'd returned to the rooftops and left the earshot of street dwellers. Ivy just eyed him with the same suspicion they had been all night. I passed your little test, didn't I? Shota shot back. Ivy took a moment to consider him before they spoke. Violent offenders get no warning. Attempted murder, sexual assault, or attacking with the intent to maim isn't allowed regardless of circumstance. Loitering and dumpster diving are not crimes, nor is stealing necessities from big chain stores. They took a pause to gauge his reaction. When he didn't disagree, they continued. Buying and selling hard drugs is not allowed, but weed is fine. Pickpocketing rich assholes is fair game, but pickpocketing from uptowners isn't. But it's non-violent, so they get a warning. A warning? How many warnings do they get? Warning people isn't going to stop them if you never give them consequences, he asked. Ivy glared at them for the interruption. 3 strikes for non-violent crimes of any kind before I involve the cops. Ivy answered, not so politely, waiting for him to ask another question without dropping the glare. What constitutes a non-violent crime? He asked. Pickpocketing, stealing without force, and sexual harassment. They answered plainly. Sexual harassment. You can't really arrest someone for sexual harassment. Arresting someone isn't the only way to teach them a lesson, Eraser, Ivy said with a smirk. Shota got the message from that, but unfortunately, he couldn't make a practice of knocking someone's lights out for being a skeevy prick and keep his hero license. Right, well, I won't be doing that last bit, but the rest seems reasonable. Ivy looked at him incredulously. You're gonna turn a blind eye if you see someone shoplifting and selling weed? Ivy asked clearly, not believing a word Shota was saying. Well, are you gonna tell the cops I'm not doing my job? He asked in a bored tone. No. Then perhaps my observational skills aren't as sharp as they used to be. I can't catch every single shoplifter and drug dealer that passes my line of sight. Maybe I'm losing my touch, he replied sardonically. The look Ivy was giving him may have gone on indefinitely if they weren't interrupted by the sound of a scream piercing through the crisp night air. Without hesitation, they both went running in the direction the noise came from. They found the source quickly. 3 men had a woman cornered in an alleyway, and one of them held a hand over her mouth to quiet her. There was a large man with a rhinoceros mutation quirk that seemed to be the ringleader of the operation, and they were yelling at the woman about how her husband owed them money, and she'd better go get him before they find him themselves and shoot the both of them dead. He couldn't erase that one's quirk. He might be a problem, but the other two looked harmless. The man on the right seemed to have a telekinesis quirk if the knives floating around him were any indication, and the one on the left had no visible quirk, which in Shota's experience meant he had a nearly 100% chance of being able to nullify it. However, Lefty was the one holding the woman's mouth shut. He should take him out first and then go after the telekinetic. But that left Ivy with that mountain of a man who, if his threats were backed by anything, had a gun. Maybe he should... You get the goons and get her out of here. I've got the rhino, Ivy said, not giving him a chance to argue as they crept away to get into position. They glanced over to Shota and put up 3 fingers as a countdown before the two of them jumped down onto the group in sync. Shota knocked out the first guy on impact, grabbed the woman by the forearm, and slung her as gently as he could behind him and away from the other 2 men. The second man barely had his wits about him after having all of his knives dropped to the ground. He had retrieved one of them and had it in hand when Shota turned on him. Sending out a loop of capture scarf, he ensnared the man's hand and pulled him toward himself, delivering a knee to the gut. With the wind knocked out of him, it was easy to disarm and knock him out and leave him on the ground next to his buddy. Quickly, Shota turned his attention to the third man, who Ivy was supposed to be fighting, half expecting to see Ivy embedded in a brick wall with the rhino guy ready to charge again. Thankfully, that's not at all the sight that greeted him. Turning around, the man was on the ground, and Ivy was pacing and cursing up a storm while unloading a handgun, tossing the magazine in one direction, the bullet from the chamber in another, and the actual gun towards Shota's feet. Once he was done with that, he made a vague hand motion to the 3 men on the ground and their discarded weapons and turned towards the woman they had cornered. Shota had to assume the hand gesture meant, "You deal with this." Little shit. With Ivy comforting the victim, Shota was, in fact, left to deal with all this. He rounded up all the weapons and patted down the offenders to make sure they weren't hiding anything on their person before cuffing them. Once he'd finished up, he looked back to Ivy, who was texting on some phone that looked like it was from a different century. Sensing his eyes on them, they looked up and said, "Suka's on his way. You'll be a dear and wait for him, won't you?" They did not wait for a response before scaling the alley wall and disappearing into the night. Yep, little shit. End of recording.